Okay, so you're having trouble. You play on console, you play on Xbox, you play on PlayStation. God forbid you play on Switch. That's your biggest mistake right there. And you're noticing recently, you just haven't been doing so well. You can't keep up with the PC players. Maybe you're having trouble 360ing. Maybe you're, going to heal someone and you throw it on a pallet or something, Or maybe you're a killer. Maybe people have been getting better at predicting your movements and then you can't get many kills or tunneling and camping isn't working, whatever. In this video, I'm going to tell you all the things that you're doing wrong and I'm going to tell you how to fix them. So stick until the end because, in my opinion, one of the most important points in the video for console players is number 13. Let's just get into it. The first one, binding multiple interactions to one button. So, default settings on console, they look like this. Now, there's not a huge problem with this. I think for the most part, it's fine the way that it is. But I think there are a few problems with this. The main one being that you have pickup item interactions and actions on the same button. If you've played this game for any amount of time on console, you'll have experienced a moment where you meant to, throw down a pallet and then you accidentally cleanse a totem. Or this is a common one, you heal someone who's down on a pallet but you accidentally throw the pallet. That is why. You need to change these to be two different buttons. That will help you a lot. Now here's what I have. So I'll talk about this later on in the video, but I actually have an Elite controller. And if you play Xbox, you might know what that is. Basically, it gives you paddles on the back. I mean, it does more than that, but it gives you paddles on the back of your controller that bind to your A, B, X, and Y. So that explains a little more why I have the buttons that I have. But for the most part, the idea is the same. Just making sure that every single button, except wiggle right and wiggle left, is bound to different buttons so that you're not doing the wrong thing when you don't mean to. Number 2, this is more of a suggestion or recommendation. Try not to bind really important buttons to the bumpers. I know that's kind of hypocritical for me to say because I have sprint on left bumper, but I've never had any trouble with that. What I have had is I've had right bumper for actions and pick up item interactions, which is probably what you have because that's default. And over time, that is really, really hard on your bumper. If there's one button on your controller that breaks the fastest, it's your bumper. For a while, I would have to hit my bumper really hard for it to register the button press. Now, for some reason, I just stopped using my right bumper and it kind of just went back to normal. I don't know how that works. I don't know why that's the way that it is, but it is. It kind of just fixed itself on its own. But anyway, your bumpers are a little more fragile than the rest of your controller, especially if you're hitting them a lot and hitting them hard. So try not to use your bumpers, but of course you can. This is where I want to talk about the Elite controller. Again, I have my buttons bound to the paddles on the back, which make it much, much easier to do everything in the game. Now, if it's something that you could be able to do, if it's in your price range, then I would definitely recommend trying to get an Elite controller. Christmas just happened. Maybe if you have Christmas money or something, I really recommend the Elite controller. It works very well. And I have a whole video talking about Elite controller settings that you can find in the description of this video. Okay, number 3. Don't leave your brightness at default. Now, I know on console there aren't any graphics settings. What I want to talk about is accessibility, so the colorblind mode. I've talked about this a lot on my channel, but there's one video specifically that I want to point you towards that I think I really went into every single colorblind mode that you can find in this game, and I broke it down into pieces, and I looked at every single possible setting that you can have. And I gave a bunch of examples and everything. So if you want to know what you should be doing for your colorblind settings, I'm going to link that video in the description as well. It really does help. It makes a world of a difference. If you're thinking that your game is really dark, especially compared to PC players, that will help you a lot. Another thing you could do is buy yourself a gaming monitor. A lot of gaming monitors have settings built in where you can actually change the color settings and the brightness settings and contrast, just really advanced settings for picture and graphics. Having a gaming monitor that can do that for you is very, very helpful as well. Okay? Number 4, making your sensitivity too fast or too slow. Again, I have a whole video talking about this specific topic as well. So I'll have that video also linked in the description. I want to talk about your sensitivity being too fast. So in that video, I talk about how you don't want a faster sensitivity. You don't want to go up to 100% because it's too fast, and when you try to go to 360, you don't actually really move. You barely even move at all because you're spinning too fast, so you're standing in place. Anyway, I go into more detail on that in the video. Apparently that's pretty controversial. That's a controversial opinion that I have. A lot of people really, really love a faster sensitivity, and a lot of people have their sensitivity on max, and that's great. Honestly, that's the best of both worlds. I would say if you can get used to 100% sensitivity and you can make it work really efficiently, do that. That's awesome. That's great. But just because this video is tailored more towards beginners, and so is that video, and because I don't think there's enough of a benefit from switching your sensitivity to, say, 75 to 100, I think that's close enough to the same value that you get anyway. I would say, as a beginner, start with 55. 55, in my other video that I keep mentioning, I talk about why 55 is the golden sensitivity. But of course, you can experiment with that, and you should experiment with that. You should start low and slowly work your way up and up and up until you think that it's good how it is, or maybe you want to keep going up, or maybe you just decide you want to stick with lower sensitivity. Anyway, everything is good. Everything works. Having your sensitivity down makes a world of a difference, and you never really realize that until you have it down. If you're not performing very well in your chases or in the game in general, it's most likely because you don't have your sensitivity down. I've gotten so many people telling me that when I gave them tips on their sensitivity, their gameplay improved immensely. So sensitivity, get that down first before anything else. Now, if you're a killer, you want to have a slightly faster sensitivity than you would if you were a survivor, simply because if a survivor goes to 360 you need to be able to track them. If your sensitivity is too slow, you won't be able to keep up with them and you will miss. But if your sensitivity is fast, obviously you can spin around and hit them if they're behind you. And for many, many other reasons, having a faster sensitivity is good. But again, if you're a beginner, start low and then work your way up slowly. So maybe for killer, maybe start at 60 and, play for a few hours or a day, and then 65, and then next day 70. Or maybe if you want to skip up, maybe you feel like it's not enough of a difference, so maybe skip up by 10 instead of 5. Whatever you want. It's up to you. It's all about experimentation. And I would definitely recommend going and watching that other video that I made that's in the description, because it goes into a lot more detail on that as well. Number 5, another big mistake is having crossplay off. I don't know if crossplay is off by default. I would assume it's on by default, but if you have it off, that is a huge mistake. First of all, I don't even think I need to tell you this. Queue time is just unbelievable. I've had so many people telling me that, because I don't use crossplay on, so I wouldn't know, but I've had a ton of people in my comments telling me that crossplay off takes maybe at least 30 minutes to get into a game, which is absurd because crossplay on takes maybe 30 seconds. So, second of all, if you're playing with crossplay off, you're going to obviously get console survivors or console killers, and console tends to have worse ping. So this is especially prevalent for survivors. You're gonna feel like you're getting hit from further away. You're gonna feel like you can't make windows as much. Your dead hard isn't gonna work, maybe. Whatever it is, there's gonna be worse ping. So that's another reason to turn crossplay on. There's a lot less tunneling when you turn it off. When it comes to console killers, they're usually newer. They're usually casual players. They're not playing to get more skilled. They're not playing for points. They're playing to win. So they're probably going to tunnel a lot more and maybe camp as well. I mean, if you were a brand new console killer, you would do the same thing. It just makes sense. And if you're a PC killer, I've noticed that a lot less PC killers opt to tunnel and camp. Again, of course, I always get this comment, well, tunneling and camping is a strategy and sometimes you have to do it. Yes, that's true. You do have to do tunneling and camping sometimes, and that's okay. But I'm saying most of the time when a killer only tunnels or only camps the whole game, it is usually a console killer. Also, having crossplay off just makes you better at the game. PC killers are obviously better just in general. They're higher skilled. So if you're going against higher skill, it's gonna force you to have to get better. Number 6, another mistake would be not having headphones. I know a lot of casual console players, they don't play with headphones. And that's totally okay, because you're a casual player, so you don't care. You're playing to have fun. But if you're playing to perform better, you need headphones. Directional audio is extremely important in this game, whether you're a survivor or a killer. If you're a survivor, you can hear the footsteps of the killer, or if it's a spirit, you can hear where she is. Maybe you'll be able to hear a generator off in another room that you can help work on, or you can hear an injured survivor that you can help heal. There's so many things. There's so many, like, game-changing directional audio pieces in this game that will change everything if you're able to hear where they're coming from, or hear them at all. For killers, you need to be able to hear where a survivor is. If a survivor is injured, you need to be able to hear where they're hiding or what room they're in. If they're running around, you can hear their footsteps. If there's a generator on the other side of the wall, you need to hear what progress it's at or if it's being worked on at all. Again, 1,000,001 reasons why you would need directional audio as a killer. So definitely look into getting a good headset. Number 7, using lockers. This is going to be a little bit more of a survivor one, but I'll mention killers really quick. So killers like to, maybe if they're brand new, they like to check lockers a lot. Don't do that. It just wastes time. Use your time to do something more important, more valuable. Okay. Now for survivors, don't be that guy. Don't be that Dwight on the other side of the map, not working on a generator, hiding in a locker while his whole team is dying. Don't be that guy. There is almost never an instance in this game where you use a locker. The only reason lockers exist in the first place is because this game was marketed as a horror game. And it's not. And I'll get into that as well in number 15 of this video, the very end. But most of the time you won't use lockers. The reason for this is if a killer happens to catch you in a locker, it is an instant down. Not only is it that, but it's an instant pickup as well. So you're pretty much damning yourself to go straight onto the hook. Even if you're healed, it's better to like hide in a corner or behind a rock. Because if the killer catches you then, they can just hit you and then you're injured, but you're still alive. If you're in a locker and you're healed, they'll just grab you out of the locker and then you're immediately down. They don't need to hit you. So if you have to hide, don't use a locker. But I also don't really recommend hiding. It is actually more valuable to just sit on a generator and wait for the killer to come to you. And then if the killer finds you, you take that chase and you run the killer. And I know that's scary, and I know you're not used to that, but you just need to expose yourself to that. And even if your chase doesn't last long, it's better than the killer walking over to your generator, not finding you because you're hiding, kicking the generator, and then going off and killing another one of your teammates, instead of you just taking chase, taking that killer's attention, and then letting that other survivor finish their generator. Of course, hiding is always a good strategy and works for certain situations, but in general, it is better to play more aggressive. Now, I said there's never a good time, or mostly never a good time, to jump in a locker. That is not true. There are some instances. So if you have a locker perk, let's see, built to last, head on, inner strength, I think that's what that's called. There's so many locker perks in this game. And what I mean by locker perk is it's a perk that requires you to get into a locker to use it or to activate whatever it is that you're activating. So you can use a locker, and using a locker sometimes is valuable. But for the most part, if you don't have a locker perk, don't use a locker. If it makes you feel better, when you're sitting on a generator and you have the urge to hide behind a rock or in a locker or, whatever, you get scared, do this. Look around you. And you pretty much always do this when you're on a generator or just in the game in general when you're not in a chase, or even when you're in a chase as well. You're always doing this. You look around you, you scout out your area, and now this does take a little bit of map knowledge, so this does take time, but you look around you and you map out loops, and you map out where you're gonna go. So while you're sitting on a generator, look around you. Do you see any windows, pallets? Maybe you see both. Think in your mind, if the killer approaches me, where am I gonna go? I'm gonna loop this pallet for a little bit until I drop that pallet, and then I'm gonna leave that pallet and go vault that window. You don't wanna be caught zoning out while you're on a generator. The killer approaches and then you don't know what to do and you don't know where to go. So only use a locker if absolutely necessary. Number 8, running in a straight line. So this is another survivor one. I know some people are so new that they don't even know what looping is, or maybe they've heard of it and they don't know how to do it. A lot of survivors on console like to try to just run in a straight line away from the killer. Obviously they don't know any better, so I don't blame them. But if you loop, it makes your chases way longer, and the value out of a long chase is that other survivors in the game will finish generators while you are doing that chase. Looping is essentially finding a window or a pallet and running around it in circles. Try to get as much value out of that pallet as possible. Now, some of my tip videos, and I'll link those in the description as well, talk a little bit about looping and how to do that and different things you can do in your looping. But I don't think I've made a video specifically designed to show you how to loop, because there's a lot more to it than just running around in a circle around a pallet or a window. So if you want to see me make a video covering a bunch of different loops and how to loop them and showing you technique and everything like that, like the video, just to let me know. Number 9, another mistake is immediately throwing pallets. A lot of console survivors panic and they throw pallets really fast. A lot of console survivors don't even know that you can stun a killer with a pallet. Again, looping makes that pallet a lot more valuable. You can get a lot more value and time out of that one pallet if you loop it. You always want to try to get a stun, But in some situations, you just won't be able to. Maybe the killer respects, or maybe it's just more valuable to just throw the pallet and let the killer have it. You can always be greedy, but in a calculated way. So if you believe for whatever reason that the killer might respect the pallet, or if you just want to take the risk and hope that the killer is going to respect the pallet, you fake throwing it, and then you keep running, and that will get even more value out of the pallet. Now, what does respecting a pallet mean? When you're chasing a survivor, and the survivor runs up to a pallet, you stop right before the pallet, assuming that the survivor will throw it and try to stun you, so that you avoid the stun. Now, if you're a survivor and you know that the killer is going to do this, or you think the killer is going to stop right before the pallet, you pretend to throw the pallet, and then you don't, you keep running. So the killer will stop in their tracks, and you will keep running, and you will get more value out of that pallet. Number 10, another mistake that killers make on console is they camp a lot. I mentioned this earlier, console killers love to camp. Camping wastes time because it allows for other survivors in the match to finish generators. Most of the time when you camp a survivor, they probably will end up getting saved anyway, so you're wasting time and not getting anything out of it, usually. And again, I'm gonna get the comments, well, camping is actually a strategy, it's actually something... And yes, in a lot of situations, camping is something that you kind of have to do. If you're in endgame and you haven't gotten a kill yet, or maybe you've gotten one or two, and you have that other survivor on a hook, you want to secure their death, or at least secure that they're going to second stage. At that point, why wouldn't you? You're securing a kill so that you win, or at least tie the game. Another mistake is tunneling. What is tunneling? Tunneling is going after one survivor, injuring them, downing them, putting them on a hook, they get unhooked, and then you go after them again. And you down them and you put them on a hook, and then they get unhooked, and then you go after them again, and you down them and you put them on a hook, and then they die. And you do that for every single survivor. You go after them, down them, you put them on the hook as many times as you need to, and you only focus on them until they're dead, and then you move on to the next person. That is a type of tunneling, and that is the most common type of tunneling for console players. Now, this is more effective than camping, but not really that much. It gives other survivors the chance to finish generators because you're so focused on one that everyone else is working on generators. I know tunneling is a strategy. Maybe you have an obsession perk and you're tunneling your obsession so you can get more stacks or whatever, that's fine. Or maybe, again, it's end game and you want to secure a kill. You can tunnel one person and kill them. That makes sense. But I'm talking to the console players, and I know you're out there and I know you're watching this video, the console players that only tunnel. Number 12, another mistake, is repeated mind games. This is a survivor and a killer one, but mostly killer. What I see most of the time in killers is they double back on everything. They mind game everything that they possibly can. Either that, or they don't mind game anything. They just W key in a straight line, but that's not usually what console players will do. For example, if you're on a TNL chasing a survivor, and you expect them to vault every time, so every single time that they go to vault something, you double back. If you do the same mind game over and over, that becomes very predictable, and the killers will start faking things in order to get you to double back on accident. What you need to do is mix up your mind games. Now, you can do this in a calculated way. If you double back on a pallet one time and the survivor expects it, then W key it next time, then you've conditioned that survivor to think that you're going to double back, and then you don't double back, and then they don't expect it. Stuff like that. Just mix up your mind games. Do things that the survivors aren't going to expect, instead of doing the same thing every single time. If you respect pallets every single time, survivors will stop throwing pallets. You can also observe what a survivor does. If a survivor fakes a pallet every time, you can start just walking through the pallet, knowing that they're gonna fake it. But then that's when mind games come in, and maybe they have conditioned you to want to walk through it, and now they're gonna throw it on your head. So just try to get into their mind and try to think what they're thinking. It's not easy, but it takes time, and you can do it. Number 13, another mistake, and honestly the most common mistake for console players to make, is that they think that this is a horror game. Yes, every once in a while, this game can be a little bit scary. And definitely when you're a new player, it is very scary. This game is marketed as a horror game, but it's a horror game where you can play as the killer. It is really not a horror game. It is more of a strategy game. It's more like chess. In a horror game, you want to avoid the killer's attention. In Dead by Daylight, it is more valuable to take the killer's attention. And if you can't take the killer's attention, at least try to work on an objective. This takes time. I know this very well. I struggled with this a ton. It takes time to get used to not getting nervous in a chase. When you're brand new and you're in a chase, you're running in a straight line, you're sweating, you're nervous, you don't know what to do, and then you die really fast, which is fine. You don't know any better. But just keep in mind, this game is not a horror game. Again, there are always times where you do try to avoid the killer's attention, but for the most part, it is more valuable to just take the killer's attention. Number 14, this is for killers. Use your killer power. A big mistake that I see a lot of console killers make is that they forget to use their power. They end up turning into an M1 killer. They play Wraith and they forget to cloak because they're so focused on trying to kill survivors, obviously. Or they play Trapper and they forget to set traps. whatever it is. They just forget to use their power. You definitely want to use the killer's power. That is the whole point of being the killer. But you also want to experiment with different killers. Find one that you like the most. Find one that fits your playstyle. Don't be afraid to be bad at a killer. It takes time to get used to different killers. You know, I've been playing this game for what, five years now, I think, and I am still absolutely horrendous with the nurse. And the nurse is the most understandable one to be bad at, but it takes time to get good with a killer and to fully understand what that killer is capable of. So experiment. Number 15, the very last mistake that I see a lot of console players making is picking perks at random, or just not picking perks at all. Not picking perks is like starting a chess game without your pawns. Perks are not an option. Well, they're optional, I guess. But there is no downside to using a perk. Now, offerings, items, add-ons, there's a downside because when you use them, you lose them. Perks, there is no downside. Use perks. You pretty much never want to go a game without using at least one perk. Now, I understand if you're brand new or if you're a casual player, understanding all these perks is very overwhelming. There's a lot of perks in the game. There's a few things you can do. You can study the perks, just go through a bunch of different perks and read about them, and find your favorite ones and then experiment with them just like you would experiment with a killer power. For killers, you could go into a custom match with bots, and you could just experiment with what those perks actually do in the game. But for survivors, it's a little more difficult because you can't go into a custom, well, I don't think you can go into a custom match and make the killer a bot. Maybe you can, but I would say the most effective way to understand perks in this game, and I've said this before and I'll keep saying this for the rest of time, not only the best way to understand perks in this game, but the best way to understand this game is to watch YouTube. Watch YouTubers, JRM, Oddstarba, Probs is a really good one because he does videos specialized to specific builds and perks. There's so many YouTubers who are so good at this game, and you can learn so much from them. I've learned everything I know about this game, and the community, and the perks, the techs, looping, just from watching Dead by Daylight YouTubers. Not only is it way more efficient to understand the game and how it works, and understand different things you can do in the game, it's also way more entertaining than just sitting there and doing research and studying. Now, you could go to Brobs' channel and look at his, this cool new stealth build. I want to learn this, and then you copy that build and you use it in a game. Or you go to Aaron and you look at his, the cool endgame build on Killer. That's so cool. Or there's this smaller, lesser-known YouTuber. His name is Landon, and I think he's pretty cool, and I think you should subscribe to him because he also makes gameplay videos, and he makes videos specialized for builds and perks, and you can learn a lot from him, I think. He's also a console player, and watching console players builds your understanding of not just the game and what you can do in the game, but what you can do in the game with the controller. I hope that helped. A lot of these tips were just general beginner tips, like don't tunnel, thinking that this is a horror game, not using killer power. That's not just a console thing, and a lot of these aren't just console things. A lot of these things happen on PC as well. But when it comes to console, most console players are either casual players or new players, and I notice most of the time, when these mistakes are being made by killers or survivors, it is because they are console players. This just seems to be the way that console players play, and so I wanted to give a few tips on what not to do if you're falling into the same trap that every other console player does. I hope you enjoyed. Like the video if you want to see me do another video specifically on looping on console, and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter, or don't. I don't really care. I don't do anything on that. I don't even like going on there. It's kind of scary, and everyone's mean and angry. All right, well, bye. I love you. Have a good day.